Well, you may not have expected it to go down this way, but the Supreme Court has ruled on the famous gay cake bake shop case and came down with a 7-2 ruling. Some liberals voting with conservatives on this one, slapping the wrist of the Chicago. Yeah, it sounds like Chicago. The Colorado Civil Rights Commission for the way they treated Jack Phillips, the proprietor of the Masterpiece Cake Shop. And this is a win for what? Well, Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott, and I'm a little perplexed by this ruling because it didn't decide anything that anybody expected it to decide. The Supreme Court did not come down on religious liberty and rule on that. They did not come down on the First Amendment free speech rights really and rule on that, although some of the justices, specifically Clarence Thomas, mentioned the First Amendment and felt that the court should have spoken more firmly on that. But what they actually did was, in Justice Kennedy's words, they dealt with the Colorado Civil Rights Commission because some of the commissioners had, and I'm going to read this as a quote, endorsed the view that religious beliefs cannot legitimately be carried into the public sphere or commercial domain, implying that religious beliefs and persons are less than fully welcome in Colorado's business community. So what they really did was they slapped down a civil rights commission and basically said you can't prejudge a case based on somebody's faith. This is fascinating because I didn't know all the details. Stephen probably knew this because he's from Colorado. But according to SCOTUS blog and Amy Howe's report therein, the court had concluded that the Civil Rights Commission's order, which among other things required the cake shop proprietor, Mr. Phillips, to sell same-sex couples wedding cakes and anything else that he would sell to opposite-sex couples, and mandated remedial training and compliance reports. The court said that must be set aside. So Stephen Green, you're from Colorado.
Set aside in hell.
What's the buzz in what do they call that? It's the beer state, right? What is the name of this?
Forest County.
We may as well be the beer state. Yeah, we have. I believe this is still true. More microbrews per capita than any other state in the union. I'm so proud of that. We got a lot of good stuff to drink here. Some good stuff to eat too. Although if I had any baking skills at all, I'd be really tempted to open a bakery that advertised wedding cakes so gay Elton John called to ask us to dial it back a little. Because this is why I love capitalism. Supply meet demand, right? And if you don't want to meet the demand like this gentleman didn't, you don't have to. And let me make something clear. He didn't refuse service to anyone. He was even willing to sell the couple a wedding cake, just not one that he applied his artistic skills to. He was willing to sell them a generic wedding cake. So clearly what we had here was a case of a couple with an axe to grind and a civil rights commission with a bigger axe to grind and the opportunity and the legal team to do just that. Let me tell you why I like this decision. I realize this is narrower than a lot of people wanted, but I think it was important to get to that 7-2 vote, which is the biggest you were ever going to get. You were never going to get Ruth Bader Ginsburg or Sotomayor over on this one. You just weren't. But 7-2 is huge. And Ken White, a.k.a. Popat, explained why this is such an important vote to get to that 7-2 on the narrow scope. 5-4 decisions get overturned a lot. Okay? You may have some really broad, go us, yay team, 5-4 decision, but the court flips 10, 20 years later, and suddenly it breaks 5-4 the other way, and suddenly team other guy has taken the legal field out from under you. But when you've got a 7-2 decision, even though it was narrow, it's important because it's much less likely to get overturned by a future court, because they're going to look at that vote. The court does this. The court is political. Sorry to break that to you. They're going to look at that and have a much harder time overturning it. And let's face it, what they did was tell a state civil rights commission, you can't be religious bigots, or I guess in this case, anti-religious bigots. And even though I'm not a religious man myself, I think that is a huge, huge step, and on a 7-2, almost unoverturnable vote. This is a big day, Scott. I'm happy about this one.
You know, apparently the justices pointed out in their writings on this ruling that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission had previously slapped down people who had baked anti-gay wedding cakes. So, you know, who had am I getting this right? Yeah, they had in both cases they had decided you can't speak either way on this issue, and so they have ruled based on their opinions, not based on civil rights. They're not interested in civil rights. Bill Whittle, Neil Gorsuch, Donald Trump's appointee to take the place of the late Antonin Scalia on the court, took a different emphasis in his ruling, and I want to quote him here. He says that in the United States, quote, "the place of secular officials isn't to sit in judgment of religious beliefs, but only to protect their free exercise. Just as it is the proudest boast of our free speech jurisprudence that we protect speech that we hate, it must be the proudest boast of our free exercise jurisprudence that we protect religious beliefs that we find offensive." Bill, do you think the court accomplished that goal here today, or is this just kicking the can down the road?
Well, first of all, if I had to choose on the merits of this case, on this particular case before the Supreme Court, I certainly think it went the way of freedom. I think there's no question that it was the correct decision to make here. But I have to be a bit of a purist about this. So when I hear people qualifying his behavior by saying he would have sold them this cake, or some of the other things known about this particular guy was that he would not make a custom cake for a divorce party because he thought divorce was immoral. He wouldn't make custom Halloween cakes because his religion told him that Halloween was somewhat satanic and so on. All of this stuff is exculpatory, but my point here is, you don't need to be exculpatory. He has a right to do whatever he wants to. There's a sign on most businesses' front door that says, "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." Now, let me just be crystal clear on this, okay? If we're talking about the public sector, if we're talking about anything in the public sector, that 100% has to be colorblind, race, religion, sexual orientation blind, and so on. But I'm kind of a purist when it comes to this kind of thing. And I think that if you have a private business on private property, you can do whatever you damn well want to in that private business. I think if you want to have a sign out front that says conservative commentators not welcome here, that's your business. That's your business. And I wouldn't take my business to a crummy, cheap
CBS,
nasty,
ABC, or NBC.
Yeah.
Those frauds.
Even if it was Chateau Marmont, I really wanted to go because I wanted to see Steven Spielberg. No, because look, if you don't have that right, if that right is on a spectrum, then the question is, where do you draw the line? This is the problem with the spectrum. You either have a right or you don't. And Seth MacFarlane tweeted out that this is just one short step away from telling black people, that we won't serve you. And when challenged on this, he said, "So you would, you would do something for Donald Trump's supporters?" And Seth said, "Oh yeah, I sign autographs for Trump supporters all the time." Okay, Seth, but what if your employer, what if Fox Network came to you and said, "You will now start doing pro-Trump Family Guys"? You have to, because we've decided that's what we want. You're telling me you'd go along with that? You telling me you'd go along with that? There's no way you would go along with that. And my final defense about this absolutist idea that you should be able to do whatever you want on private property is a very simple one to understand. Those people who say that man had an obligation to make that cake, by that exact same reasoning, you're telling me that an elderly Jewish couple with tattoos on the inside of their arm, when confronted with a Nazi rally with a picture of Adolf Hitler surrounded by swastikas, would be required by law to make that cake. If you're telling me that's the country we live in, I don't want to live in that country. This is the thing. And it's odd, isn't it, that so many people screaming about how this is prejudice are the ones who are doing everything they can to keep conservative speakers out of colleges, off of any kind of a property. They're closing them down, they're protesting, they're smashing windows, they're doing all this stuff. College is university is a public it's a public venue. You don't have a right to do that on public property. If in your private property you want to say, no, we don't serve conservatives here, that's your business. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, as long as you're not getting taxpayer money to create those cakes.
Correct.
Bingo.
You know, and earlier I was kind of tripping over my own words. I want to get this accurate, as SCOTUS blog had reported that Justice Kennedy pointed out that the commission's treatment of Jack Phillips, the cake baker's religious objections, was at odds with its own rulings, the commission's rulings in cases of bakers who refused to create cakes with images that conveyed disapproval of same-sex marriage. So apparently this commission stood behind people who refused to bake anti-gay cakes, so to speak, anti-gay marriage cakes anyway, and yet cracked down on Phillips. So as many people pointed out in the media already, I mean, this case doesn't solve the religious liberty question. It doesn't solve the free speech question. But I do like to see, if you want to call it this, judicial activism when it comes to restraining the power of government. And this unaccountable civil rights so-called commission of appointees who decided that they would pick and choose who gets to have the right to conduct their business as they please and who gets the right to say what and who is, you know, being forced. Literally, they said, you have to make these cakes that you have religious objections to, and you're going to go to remedial training. What kind of gulag society is this?
Yeah.
I love the fact, even though I'm reluctant to see the federal government do anything to restrict power at the state level, I think if the Supreme Court does anything, it slaps down overzealous government officials who decide that they're going to impose their view of society on independent business people or individuals. So I think this is a good week for liberty in these here United States. I think, I hope, and I haven't heard lately, maybe Steve knows the update on this, but I hope Mr. Phillips' business has managed to survive the onslaught and the attacks that have come as a result of this case.
He almost went under, but as I understand it, he's doing okay now.
Good. And I hope he's able to recover fully from this. And oddly enough, I hope that this ruling, which crossed political lines, which crossed ideological lines, will actually do a little something to bring people together. In a sense, even though the Supreme Court slapped down a state commission, it also intentionally stayed away from major questions, basically leaving those to the states and to the people themselves. And I think that that's a good direction to take things when it comes to federal jurisprudence. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.